My son stood in his own doorway, looked at the pie in my hands and said, "We already set the table, Mum. There's no seat for you." He said it the way you'd tell a delivery driver they had the wrong address. Polite, a little tired. Behind him, I could hear my grandchildren laughing and Tara's mother saying something about the wine, and the warm yellow light of that house spilled out onto the cold porch where I stood holding a pumpkin pie. I'd baked at 5 that morning. I'd driven 40 minutes in the dark to be there. I had the recipe in my head before either of those children was born. And my own son was telling me there was no chair for me at a Thanksgiving table I had paid for half the food on. "That's all right," I said, because the only thing I had left to protect in that moment was the steadiness of my own voice. "I'll just leave this for the kids." "They've got dessert covered," Brian said. Tara's mom brought a whole spread. Behind him, I saw Tara cross the hallway with a serving bowl, glance at me on the porch, and not slow down. That look stayed with me longer than Brian's words did. I nodded. I turned around, and I carried my pie back down the steps to my car, set it carefully on the passenger seat like a small living thing, and sat there in the driveway with my hands on the wheel. What none of them knew, what Brian especially didn't know, was that 2 days earlier I had found a document on my own counter that explained exactly why there was no seat for me anymore. And by the time that pie went stale, I would understand that the locked door I'd just walked away from was the smallest problem I had. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because you need to know who I was before all this, or none of it will make sense. My name is Lorraine. I'm 71 years old. My husband Walter and I ran a bakery on Maple Street for 31 years. The kind of place where people came in for a loaf of bread and ended up telling you about their divorce. We weren't rich. We were the kind of comfortable that comes from never once spending money we didn't have. When Walter passed 4 years ago, he left me the house, a modest savings, and the building on Maple Street, which we'd bought outright in 1994, and which now had a little card and gift shop renting the storefront. That rent check was a good part of how I lived. Walter worried about me at the end, not about money. He worried I gave too much. "You'd hand somebody your last dollar and call it manners," he told me once, holding my hand in that hospital bed. He worried I'd be taken advantage of someday. What he never imagined, what neither of us could have predicted, was that the person doing the taking would be the boy we raised. I have 2 children. My daughter Janet lives in Ohio with her husband, and my granddaughter Nora, who is 10 and writes me letters in purple pen. And my son Brian, who lives 20 miles away with his wife Tara and their 2 little ones, Sophie and Caleb. For years, Brian was my easy one. Tara changed that, though I'd be lying if I blamed her for all of it. Brian made his own choices. He just made them quietly, while she did the talking. It started small, the way these things always do. A comment here, a look there. About a year ago, Tara began saying things like, "Lorraine, you really shouldn't be climbing ladders at your age." When I changed a light bulb, then it was, "Are you sure you can keep up with the building? Tenants, repairs, all that paperwork. It's a lot for someone in your situation." My situation. As if widowhood were a medical condition, I let it go. I'm telling you all of this so you understand that I was patient long past the point where patience was wise. I told myself she meant well. I told myself a lot of things. Then came the day, 2 days before that Thanksgiving, when I drove out to Brian's to drop off some of Sophie's birthday photos I'd had printed. Nobody was home, but the side door was unlocked, the way it always was. So I let myself into the kitchen to leave the envelope on the counter. And next to the fruit bowl, in a neat stack, sat a set of legal-looking papers with a sticky note on top in Tara's handwriting. The note said, "Bring to Marcus Free POA plus the financial review. Don't mention to L until after." L, that was me. Don't mention to me. I stood in that kitchen for a long moment. Then I did something I'm not proud of and would do again in a heartbeat. I took out my phone and photographed every page. POA. I knew what that stood for. Power of attorney. A document that would let someone make legal and financial decisions on my behalf. A financial review I wasn't supposed to know about, with someone named Marcus on Friday. I put the envelope of photos down, left the papers exactly as I'd found them, and drove home with my heart going like a rabbit. And that, you see, is why 2 days later there was no seat for me at the table. They weren't planning a dinner. They were planning a takeover, and the dinner was just the first move. Get the old woman used to being on the outside, used to not being consulted, used to being managed. I just hadn't read the whole script yet. That night, sitting in my driveway with the cold pie beside me, I did not cry, and I did not call anyone. I went home, and I took out the small spiral notebook I've kept on my kitchen table for 20 years, the one where I write down what matters. And I wrote one line, the first entry in what would become a very full week. Today, my son told me there was no seat for me, so I will find out who built the table. Then I went to bed, and the next morning I started reading. The photographs on my phone were clearer than I'd hoped. The top document really was a durable power of attorney, drafted to name Brian as my agent over all financial and property matters. It hadn't been signed. There was a blank line waiting for me. Underneath it was a second document, and this one made the bottom drop out of my stomach. It was a printout of an email, and the subject line read, "Assessing capacity, next steps." I'm not a lawyer, but I ran a business for 3 decades, and I read every contract I ever signed twice. I read that email 5 times. It was from someone whose signature block said he was a care coordination consultant, Marcus, presumably, and it laid out, in gentle, bureaucratic language, the steps a family could take when an aging parent shows signs of decline and resists assistance. It mentioned getting a capacity evaluation. It mentioned, if necessary, petitioning the court for guardianship or conservatorship. Guardianship, conservatorship. I sat down hard at my kitchen table. If you don't know what those words mean, let me make it plain, because I had to learn it fast. A conservatorship is when a court decides a person can no longer manage their own affairs and hands that power to someone else. Your money, your property, your decisions. It happens to ordinary old people every single day, quietly, in family courtrooms all over this country. And the most common people to file for it are adult children. Sometimes because they're truly worried. And sometimes because mom is sitting on a paid-off building generating rent, and they've decided they shouldn't have to wait for her to die to get their hands on it. My son wasn't trying to disinherit me. He was trying to declare me already gone. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't rage. Rage would have been easier. What I felt was a cold, clear quiet, like the air right before snow. They thought I was soft. They thought I was old and trusting and easy. And they were about to learn the difference between an old woman and a foolish one. I sat at that kitchen table for 41 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the stove. I didn't pace. I didn't make calls. I didn't write angry messages. I just sat and let the panic burn off and let the thinking start. Walter always said I did my best work after I stopped being scared and started being precise. Then I made a list in my notebook of everything I now knew and everything I needed to find out. And the first thing I needed to find out was how far this had already gone. It had gone further than I knew. That's the thing about these stories. Every door you open shows you a room you didn't know was there. 2 days later, before I'd even decided what to do, Tara came to me. That surprised me. She rang my doorbell on a Saturday morning with Sophie and Caleb in the car. Said she had errands. Asked if I'd watch them for an hour. Of course I said yes. They're my grandchildren, and none of this was their fault. But she didn't leave right away. She lingered in my front hall, and I understood she'd come to take my temperature, to find out whether the old woman suspected anything. You seemed upset at Thanksgiving, she said, smiling. I hope there's no hard feelings about the seating. It just got so crowded. No hard feelings, I said, and waited, because the person who speaks second usually learns more. She looked around my front hall, at Walter's photographs, at the good rug, the way a person looks at a room they've already mentally redecorated. Then she said it, still smiling, soft as butter. You know, Lorraine, I think it would do you a lot of good to let other people carry some of the weight. The building, the money, all of it. You've earned a rest, she tilted her head. And honestly, a woman your age, alone out here, hanging on to everything so tightly, people are going to start to wonder if you're really thinking clearly. We just want to protect you from that, before it becomes a problem. There it was, the smile and the knife in the same sentence. People are going to start to wonder if you're really thinking clearly. That wasn't a worry, that was a preview. She was telling me, to my face, that if I didn't hand it over willingly, they would make the case that I couldn't be trusted to hold it at all. That's very thoughtful, I said. I'll give it some thought. And I closed the door and stood behind it with my hand flat against the wood, because now I knew this wasn't carelessness or even greed exactly. It was a plan, and Tara had just told me the plan would proceed with or without my cooperation. The only question left was who would finish building their case first, her or me. I started gathering that afternoon. I called the post office because something had been nagging me. For 2 weeks, my rent check from the storefront tenant hadn't arrived, and I'd assumed it was the holidays. But when I asked, the clerk told me a mail forwarding request had been submitted on the building's address, forwarding the building's mail to Brian and Tara's house. They hadn't just talked about managing my property. They had quietly started rerouting it. Whoever controlled that mailbox controlled the rent, the tax notices, everything. I felt the floor tilt, and then I felt something harden in me that I hadn't felt since Walter's funeral, when his own brother tried to walk off with his watch collection. I filed a request to reverse the forwarding that same hour. But I understood now that this was not a misunderstanding I could fix with a phone call. This was a plan, with a timeline, and Friday, the day on that sticky note, was bearing down. I waited 41 hours before I called a lawyer. I want you to understand that was a choice, not a delay. I needed to walk into that office knowing more than they did, with my facts in order. Not as a frightened old woman, but as a client with a problem and a goal. So I spent those 41 hours gathering. I pulled 3 years of bank statements and saw, plain as day, that there had been no irregular spending, no missed bills, no confusion, because the whole guardianship game rests on convincing a court you can't manage your own affairs. I found the building's deed, my tax returns, Walter's will. I made copies of everything, including the photographs from that kitchen counter. And then I made one appointment that, looking back, was the smartest thing I did. I called my own doctor and asked for the name of a geriatric specialist who could perform a cognitive evaluation. Not because I doubted myself. Because I knew the single most powerful answer to a false claim of incapacity is a signed, dated, professional document saying, "You are entirely sound of mind." The evaluation came first, before the lawyer could even see me. I sat across from a geriatric specialist named Dr. Osei in a quiet office that smelled of coffee and paper. She was younger than my daughter and had eyes that didn't miss much. "There's no wrong answer to any of this," she said, opening a folder. "I just want you to talk me through some things. Tell me what's today's date." I told her. The date, the day, the season, the name of the sitting president, the floor we were on. Good. Now I'm going to say 3 words, and I'll ask you to repeat them back later. Apple, table, penny. She made a note. "Can you spell world backwards for me?" DLROW, I said. Walter used to make me do that one at parties. He thought it was funny. She smiled and slid a sheet across the desk. I'd like you to take 100 and subtract 7, then keep subtracting 7. 93, 86, 79, 72. I kept going past where most people stop. Do you want me to do the building's quarterly taxes while I'm at it? I can do those in my head too. She laughed. Then she got quieter, more careful. Lorraine, can I ask why you came in for this? Most people your age, we're chasing them to get them in the door. You called us. So I told her. The papers on the counter. The note that said, don't mention to L. Marcus. The word conservatorship. The mail quietly rerouted to my son's house. I told her flat and plain, the way you'd describe a recipe. And when I finished, she set down her pen. The 3 words, she said. Can you say them back? Apple, table, penny. I looked at her. I've been remembering things people wished I'd forget for 50 years, Doctor. I'm not going to start now. She wrote for a long time. Then she looked up, and there was something fierce under her professional calm. I'm going to put this in writing today, and I'm going to be unambiguous, because I've watched this exact thing happen to other women in that chair, and it makes me sick. You have full decision-making capacity. No impairment. None. If anyone tries to tell a court otherwise, you bring them this. She signed the page, dated it, and had her assistant notarize it before I left. That, she said, handing it to me, is your shield. Don't let it out of your sight. The next morning, with the shield already in my folder, I sat across a wide desk from an elder law attorney named Raymond Coyle. He was about my age, reading glasses pushed up into white hair, the unhurried manner of a man who has seen every kind of family cruelty and stopped being surprised by any of it. I laid the folder down and told him everything in order. When I finished, he was quiet a moment. Then he said, Lorraine, you found this before they filed. Do you understand how rare that is? Most of my clients come to me after they've been served. You walked in with the blueprint and a doctor's note. He tapped the folder. We can win this without ever raising our voices. We do it on paper. Tell me, who do you actually trust? My daughter Janet. And eventually my granddaughter Nora, but she's 10. Then here's what we build. He pulled a legal pad toward him. First, a revocable living trust. You're the trustee, meaning you, and only you, control every dollar while you're alive. We move the house and the Maple Street building into it. A trust you control can't be hijacked by a guardianship petition the way loose assets can. We're taking the keys out of the ignition and putting them in your pocket. And the children? I asked. I have 3 grandchildren. I won't play favorites. He looked at me over the glasses, and I think that's the moment he decided he liked me. Most people in your chair want to swing the hammer, he said. They want to cut the sun out and let him feel it. I'm not going to do that. Why not, after what he let happen? I thought about how to say it. Because Sophie and Caleb and Nora didn't do anything but get born into this. If I punish Brian by punishing his children, then I've become a smaller version of the thing I'm fighting. I folded my hands. All 3 grandchildren, equal shares, paid out when they come of age, not before. And I want one steady hand to manage it fairly for the others when I'm gone. Successor trustee, Raymond said, writing. Who? Nora, the one who writes me letters in purple pen. Not because she's the favorite, she gets the same share as the others. Because she's the steady one. Equal love, one steady pair of hands. He stopped writing and looked at me. That, he said, is the fairest instruction I've been given in a long time. Then he set down his pen. Now, there's one more thing, and it's the part that protects all of it, a clause. We write it so that any beneficiary or any beneficiary's parent, acting for them, who initiates or supports a legal action to declare you incompetent, or to seize control of your assets during your life, forfeits their child's standing to a minimal share. He let that sit. We don't name Brian. We don't name Tara. We don't have to. We just make the very thing they're planning the trigger that blows up in their own hands. So, if they file, I said slowly, they don't just lose, they cost their own children. Cause and effect, Raymond said. I baked for 31 years, I told him. Cause and effect is the whole business. He almost smiled. Last thing, we send one letter. Certified mail, return receipt requested, so there's a legal record of the day it lands and the signature of whoever takes it. Short, polite. It tells your son you've completed a full estate plan with council, passed a capacity evaluation, and placed all your assets in a trust under your sole control. No threats. No accusations. It just closes every door they've been trying to pry open and does it in a way a judge can read later. I signed the trust over the next week. We transferred the deed to the building and the house into it. And then we mailed the letter. And I went home and made bread. Because that is what I do when I need my hands busy while my mind is at peace. The certified letter was signed for on a Tuesday. Brian called me Tuesday night. Mom, he said, and his voice was strange, half angry and half something else. What is this? What did you do? Tara says you've got some lawyer turning you against us. I have a lawyer, I said. And I turned myself, dear. Nobody else was needed. You make it sound like we were trying to help you. You're getting older. The building's a lot. We just wanted to make sure. Brian, I kept my voice level as a countertop. I have a note in your wife's handwriting that says, don't mention to Elle until after. After what? After you'd had me sign a power of attorney I never read? After your Friday meeting with Marcus about my capacity? I read the email. I know what conservatorship means. So please don't tell me it was to help me. The silence went on a long time. I could hear Tara's voice in the background, sharp and low, asking what I was saying. It wasn't like that, he finally said, and the fact that he couldn't put any conviction behind it told me everything. It was exactly like that, I said gently. But here's what matters now. I'm not going to fight you in a courtroom, because I don't have to. The house and the building are in a trust I control. I've been evaluated and found completely competent. And I've made arrangements for the grandchildren that are fair to all three of them. You don't need to manage me, Brian. You never did. Now go check on your kids. And I hung up, because there is a moment when the most powerful thing you can do is stop talking. I thought that might be the end of it. It was not. These things never end where you think they will, and the people who reach for your life don't let go just because you've made it hard. They get desperate. And desperation is its own second act. 4 days later, it stopped being about lawyers and started being about my name. My phone began buzzing in the early evening and didn't stop. First my sister-in-law, then a cousin I hadn't spoken to since Walter's funeral. Then my old friend, Patricia from church, her voice careful in that way people get when they've heard something and don't know whether to believe it. Lorraine, she said, I'm sure it isn't true, but someone's saying that you haven't been yourself, that you've cut off your own grandchildren. I just wanted to hear it from you. Tara had sent a long message to the entire extended family. I finally saw it when my daughter Janet called me in tears and read it aloud. It said, I'd had a breakdown since Walter died, that I was confused, isolated, not the woman we knew, that a predatory lawyer had gotten his hooks into a vulnerable widow, that I had cruelly cut Brian's children out of everything, out of spite and paranoia. And she'd attached screenshots, my own short, clipped text to Brian, stripped of context, made to look cold and erratic. I'm going to be honest with you, because I promised I would. That one got through. The conservatorship hadn't frightened me the way this did. Money and property I could armor. But sitting in my kitchen, holding a phone full of relatives, wondering whether I'd lost my mind, I felt something I hadn't felt through any of it. I felt alone, and I felt the cold possibility that a lie repeated by enough people becomes a kind of truth. Aunt Carol called and actually said the words, Well, Lorraine, there are two sides to everything, and I sat at my table and, for the first time in the whole ordeal, I put my head in my hands. I let myself feel it for a while, and then I dried my face, and I remembered what Dr. Osei had said. You bring them this. I had built the answer to this exact attack weeks before it came. I just had to use it. I didn't write a long defense. I didn't argue. I called Janet back. I'm going to send you 3 things, I said. I want you to read them, and then you decide for yourself what's true. I sent her Dr. Osei's, signed, notarized, evaluation, full decision-making capacity, no impairment. I sent her the certified letter Raymond had written, calm and loyally and dated. And I sent her 1 photograph, just 1. I didn't need the rest. The sticky note, in Tara's own handwriting, bring to Marcus Free POA plus the financial review. Don't mention to Elle until after. Janet was quiet on the phone for a full minute. Then she said, slowly, she wrote, don't mention to Elle until after. After. They were going to have you sign something and not tell you what it was. Her voice cracked. And there's a doctor's report, notarized, saying you're completely fine. Better than fine, apparently, I said. Unusually lucid. I'm thinking of having it framed. She laughed, that wet, relieved laugh, and then she got fierce. I'm sending all 3 to the whole family, not to fight. Just so they have the truth and not only her version of it. You don't have to do that for me, I said. I'm not doing it for you, she said. I'm doing it because it's true, and because Sophie and Caleb deserve a family that knows the difference. You cannot run a campaign claiming a woman is confused and manipulated when she calmly produces a notarized evaluation, a lawyer's letter, and the receipt for your own plot in your own handwriting. The screenshots Tara hoped would convict me, convicted her instead. Patricia called back within the hour to apologize. Even Aunt Carol went quiet. That is the whole difference between shouting and documentation. Shouting fades by morning. A signed page is still there in the drawer when the noise stops. A week after that, my doorbell rang on a grey afternoon, and it was Brian, alone. No Tara, no kids. He stood on my porch the way I'd stood on his, and there was something undone about him. A man who'd been arguing with himself for days. Can I come in? He asked. I made coffee. Because you can be wronged by someone and still pour them a cup. The 2 things don't cancel out. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd sat for 41 minutes, deciding who I was going to be. The group message was Tara's idea, he said, staring into the mug. I told her not to send it. I told her it was going too far. He looked up. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend the rest of it was all her. The papers were on my counter, Mom. I knew what they were. I let myself believe it was for your own good, because that was easier than admitting what it really was. And what was it really? I asked. I wasn't being cruel. I needed to hear if he knew. He was quiet, a long time. We're underwater, he finally said. The house, 2 car payments, the kids' activities, Tara's parents help us and never let us forget it. And I'd look at that building, just sitting there making money, and I'd think she doesn't even need it, and we're drowning, and someday it'll be ours anyway. So why not just manage it now? He pressed a hand over his eyes. I started thinking of you as a stage of an inheritance, instead of as my mother. I don't know when that happened. I'm ashamed of it. And there it was, the truest thing he'd said in a year. He hadn't stopped loving me. He'd started seeing me as a thing he was waiting to receive. That's the quietest cruelty there is, and most people who do it never once say it out loud. I appreciate you saying that, I told him. I do. But Brian, you need to hear what's true now, even though it's hard. The trust isn't revenge. It's a fence, and you taught me I needed one. The grandchildren are all taken care of, equally, fairly, the way I'd have done it anyway. I'm not cutting Sophie and Caleb out of my heart or my life. but I am never again going to hand the keys to my life to someone who decided I'd had it long enough. I put my hand over his. If you want to be in my life, you're in it as my son, not as my agent, not as my heir in waiting. Just my boy. That's the only seat I'm offering. But it's a good one, and it's always yours. He cried then, the way grown men cry, ashamed and trying to hide it. And I held his hand and let him, because forgiveness and boundaries are not opposites. You can do both at the same time. I just had to learn how. That was 8 months ago. I want to tell you where things stand, because the ending matters as much as the storm. Tara and I are cordial and careful, which is honestly more than I expected, and exactly enough. She knows I have the note. She knows I have the report. We don't speak of any of it, and that silence is a kind of treaty. Brian and I talk every week. He started seeing a real financial counselor, an honest one, and they're climbing out of the hole the slow, unglamorous way, which is the only way that lasts. Last month, he fixed my back gate without being asked and wouldn't take a dime for it. And I let him, because pride runs both directions, and a man needs to feel like a son again. The grandchildren come on Sundays now. Sophie has decided she's going to be a baker and stands on a stool at my counter with flour to her elbows. Caleb eats more dough than ever reaches the oven. Nora calls from Ohio every Sunday too, and she doesn't know yet that one day she'll be the steady hand holding the whole thing together for her cousins. And there's no rush for her to know. Let her be 10. Let her write her letters in purple pen. And the storefront on Maple Street, the little card shop, moved out in the spring, and I didn't rent it again. Instead, I cleaned out the old bakery kitchen behind it, the one Walter and I worked in for 31 years. And on Saturday mornings now, I teach a free baking class for anyone who wants to come. Widows, mostly. A few widowers. A young single mother who reminds me of myself at that age. We make bread, and we make pie, and we talk about our lives. And that storefront my son once tried to manage out from under me is the most alive it's been in a decade. The rent I gave up came back to me as something better than money. On the night this all began, I drove away from a locked door with a pumpkin pie growing cold on the seat beside me. I never did throw that pie out. I took it the next morning to the woman next door, an 84-year-old named Ruth, whose own children never call, and we ate the whole thing at her kitchen table with 2 forks and a pot of coffee, and she said it was the best pie she'd had in years. So, the dessert found a table after all. Just not the one I'd expected. Last week, I opened my little spiral notebook, the one on my kitchen table, and turned to that first entry from the worst night, the one that said, "Today, my son told me there was no seat for me, so I will find out who built the table." And under it, on a fresh line, I wrote the closing entry. It said, "I found out who built the table. It was me. It was always me. And now there is a seat for everyone I choose to seat, and a fence around the ones I don't." People ask me sometimes if I'm angry after everything. I'm not. Anger is a fire you have to keep feeding, and I'm too old to spend my good days tending a fire. What I am is awake. I spent a long time believing that love meant making yourself endlessly available, that a good mother is one who never has a door, never has a limit, never says enough. But I've learned that a woman who cannot say no is not generous. She is just unguarded, and the people who truly love you can live with your fences. It's only the ones who are counting on the gap who complain. So if you're out there, and someone has started talking about you in the past tense while you're still standing in the room, start reading. Gather your papers. Get your doctor's note. Find your Raymond. Build your fence, calmly and completely, before they ever know you've picked up a pen. You don't owe anyone the keys to your life just because you gave them their first set of car keys decades ago. You raised them to stand on their own. So let them. I got my seat back. Not by raising my voice once. Not by begging for a chair at a table that was never really mine. I got it back by quietly building my own table, in my own kitchen, on my own terms, with my own name on the deed. Because sometimes dignity does not arrive with shouting,